Thank you. Board Member Lane.
She indicated she might be late.
Yes, okay. Board Member Rosario.
Here.
Thank you. Vice Chair Obringer.
I'm here.
Member Andrade. Member Andrade. Member Best. Member Best.
Here.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Member Brubaker.
Here.
Member Buren. Member Buren. Member Burke.
Here, and welcome back, Sharon.
Thank you. Member Carey.
Here.
Member Corkin. Member Corkin. Member DeChambeau. Member DeChambeau. Okay. Member Dieter.
Here.
Member Gregory.
Here.
Member Ho is not here today. Member Lacey.
Contamination and things. The water bottle fillers is a definite here.
Member Lacey.
On the left, we have
Member Nason.
Here.
Member Robinson.
Here.
Member San Juan.
Here.
Member Skardoff.
Here.
Member Sitsui.
Here.
Member Williams.
Here.
Chair Rickard.
Here.
Staff present today, Chief of Government and Legislative Affairs, Eric Fuller. AGM of Public Safety, Chief Chair Burrow. I believe CFO and AGM of Management Services and Finance, Deborah Ocker, is here. There she is. And Public Affairs, I believe Juliana Schirmer is present, and Assistant Finance Officer, Deborah Spalding. Also present, Christina Crosby, Budget Manager, Yolanda Burial Knight, Clerk of the Board, Matthew James, Administrative Analyst 2, Andrew Waller, Prime Gov, Sydney Erickson, Prime Gov. Have I missed any additional staff? Oh, I'm sorry, Assistant General Manager of Operations, Jim O'Connor. And I see Captain Alan Love is also here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Today's PAC meeting is held in accordance with Governor Newsom's executive order allowing for board members to participate in standing committee meetings remotely. We are also providing live audio streaming and have provided the public the opportunity to email or call in prior to the meeting for public comment. This information can be found on the agenda on the district website, ebparks.org. Do any committee members have any questions about the meeting procedures? Hearing none, we will begin our agenda. The first item on the agenda actually should be approval of our minutes from the last meeting, I believe, Sharon, should it not?
There are no minutes to approve at this meeting. They'll be at the January meeting.
Oh, okay. That's why it wasn't on the agenda.
That's why it's
Got
not
it.
there.
Okay. Board member comments. We have at least one board member here. Board member Rosario, do you have comments to make?
Yes, I just wanted to thank you all for attending and being part of the PAC. You form an excellent venue for the public as well as a resource for the board of directors. I just want to give you a couple of little highlights from Ward 2, which is what I represent. I just had a tour of the McCosker Ranch creek restoration, which is the largest creek restoration we've undertaken, 2,400 linear feet. It looks very, very, very different now. The creek channel has been totally, almost half of it's been excavated, and they're buttoning it up for the winter rains. But it looks very, very good. And the next half will be completed next year, but that's looking very good. At Roberts Park, we're looking to rehab the pool there, and just got noticed that we're close to having that fully funded. almost $9 million. We'll actually be going to be increasing the size of the pool from 5 lanes to 7. And then also rehabbing the shower buildings as well. And then Lake Temescal, they've, as you know, feasibility study there was completed. We do need to dredge. It's down, the depth there is 12 feet, used to be 60. But it's going to cost us about 35 million to get down to 35 feet. So in the meantime, we've installed nano bubblers to help, along with doing alum treatments to keep the cyanobacteria, blue-green algae at bay. And right now we're kind of looking for a mystery E. coli event that's coming off our beach somehow. So we're looking for that. But we're working with the city of Oakland. We've started a standing committee, and to improve our communications. And the city of Oakland is committed to improving their sewer systems around the lake. And then going south, we opened up Judge John Sutter Regional Shoreline. It looks great. If you haven't seen it yet, the views from there are incredible. And then looking forward to, we just got conceptual plans for the Crowley property. And then also which is right on the shore there, along the Embarcadero, and that'll be a nice extension of the Bay Trail there. But thank you all, and for being participating in the PAC, and you are going to have an earful this evening. I just had it. So thank you again.
Thank you, Dee. I believe we're going to be joined later by Beverly Lane, and if she joins us, we'll have her make comments as well. But at this point, she's still in her other meetings. Juliana Shermer, are you available for an update on the foundation?
Chair Rickard, it doesn't look like she is actually on the Zoom call. I thought she was. And I also don't see Carol Johnson.
Right. Well, we'll come back to them if they appear later and would like to join us, since this seems to be a day of multi-meetings for everybody involved. So we're just juggle as we need to. Madam Secretary, do we have any public comments?
Yes, Chair Rickard, we have one public comment from Francis Mendoza, not on the agenda.
Great. We'd love to hear from Francis Mendoza. Join us, please.
Hello, everybody. It's great to see some familiar faces. Thank you, Madam Clerk and esteemed members of the Parks Advisory Committee. My name is Francis Mendoza, and I go by he, they, sila pronouns. First and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Chochenyo Ohlone land. As many of you know, I'm a naturalist at Coyote Hills Regional Park, and I've been at the Tidewater Boating Center, Crab Cove, and the Hayward Shoreline Interpretive Center in the past 15 years. In fact, I started out with the Park District way back in 1994 as an interpretive student aide at Ardenwood, and I've enjoyed my career with the district immensely. That said, I was recently placed in the second hiring pool for the supervising naturalist position, effectively being denied a promotion for the third time in the past 5 years. I believe this speaks to unfair hiring practices, very little attention to retention, and a severe lack of upward mobility, evidenced by the fact that there are no BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as supervising naturalists, and the only ones promoted from within have all been white. On June 16, the board passed a resolution denouncing racism and standing in solidarity with all BIPOC. It was stated that the district would, quote, ensure our workforce reflects the communities we serve at all levels of the organization, and will recruit, hire, and retain competitive talent from park industry professionals of color. And the resolution directed the district to, quote, identify, acknowledge, and address racism, implicit bias, and the systems and policies that prevent Black employees and other people of color from realizing their full potential. As a member of AFSCME Local 2428's Workforce Diversity Committee, I know this is not an isolated occurrence and underscores the pervasive systemic racism that the board resolved to address. During last week's Workforce Diversity Committee meeting, it was brought up in the EEO report that Asian and Latinx males left the Park District last fiscal year at twice the rate as other ethnic groups. This substantiates my claim that my experience is not an isolated one. Because of low staff morale, lack of upward mobility, and unfair hiring practices, I'm contemplating leaving the district for other opportunities. Currently, I am the director of the National Association for Interpretation's JEDI section, which stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, Accessibility, and Inclusion. And I look forward to advancing the mission to dismantle systems of oppression in all of our parks, historic sites, and visitor centers. I'm encouraged by the strides the district is making, from instilling preferred pronouns in our email signatures to requiring all staff and board members to take implicit bias training. Lastly, in 1994, I worked with now retired naturalist Jan Southworth Kidder, who at the time was only the second female naturalist in the district. Now, the majority of the Interpretive and Recreation Services Department are female, including our leader, Ann Casabom, at the helm. I think we can do better. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Francis. We appreciate your comments and we'll take them to heart. We will later in the meeting be talking about our agenda and goals for the year, and that will incorporate some JEDI issues as well. So your feedback is appreciated.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I believe we're ready for our first presentation from Deborah Ocker on the 2021 proposed operating project and program budget. Linda Best, do you want to introduce this by reporting on the Finance Committee meeting?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rick. The Finance Committee met just prior to this meeting and had a chance to review and make some comments, ask questions about the proposed budget. Looks pretty straightforward. We're prepared to recommend that the PAC recommend the budget to the Board of Directors after we finish our presentation and any questions and comments that people may have. I do want to make one comment. I think the budget is well presented and is certainly cautionary about going forward with uncertain times. I also want to commend the General Manager's message where he recounted how the district has responded to the pandemic. It reminded me what a great job the district and all of its staff have done to meet the challenges that we faced and still make parks accessible to the public. So with that, I would ask Deborah to please go ahead with her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, members of the PAC and Chair Rickard. So I was a little bit late to the Finance Committee meeting because we had a Board Finance Committee, as Director Rosario said. So it's budget all the time today. So we're going to go ahead and do our presentation and hopefully answer any questions that you might have. I have with me here Chief Chiaburo, AGM O'Connor, Deborah Spalding, and some other staff members here to answer any questions that you might have. But I'll go ahead and dive in. The General Manager did have an opportunity to make some opening remarks during the Finance Committee meeting, and I'll try to make sure I highlight some of those. So let me share my screen and get us started on the budget presentation. So here we are. We have our new budget manager, Christina Crosby. She started right in the summer, right at the beginning of the budget process. And she worked very closely with Deborah Spalding putting this budget together in the unique fashion of being in a pandemic. So some of the major budget highlights are, our budget does include COVID response. We were all hoping we would be finished with this, but we're not. And so there's certainly additional safety, supplies, PPE, public information, technology support, and just all the innovation that we've utilized to keep our parks open, right? Our parks being open, as the General Manager said, is one of the major goals, and keeping our staff and the public safe. And then going back to our core mission, public access. So this budget includes continued work in ADA improvements. There's a project at Don Castro that we're putting forward along with some other smaller ADA projects. And a carryover from last year is reviewing our ADA, what is it called? It's our self-assessment. We are continuing to fill the gaps in the San Francisco Bay Trail and working on our naturalist programs. Vegetation management, fuels management, a high priority that the general manager highlights all the time. It really is, you know, coming out with all of our changing climate issues. And in this budget, we are adding a additional fire crew or fuels crew. Last year in the budget, we had I think a 4-member crew added with some vehicles and equipment. This year, we're adding 3 new fire crew members. Also for trails maintenance, we're adding a 2nd small trails crew that's run out of the operations department. And they help with more seasonal work, maintaining our trails and doing vegetation management. Those are some of the highlights. Also, we continue with our environmental restoration, working on completing the McCosker Creek restoration, working on the Hayward Marsh. The former gun club is still being evaluated and we're setting money aside for that restoration. Infrastructure for our grazing program. So grazing helps to reduce the grassland vegetation. It also helps for ecological restoration. And we have done some assessing with our new grazing team and found that water infrastructure is not always properly placed. Jewel Lake feasibility study is continuing along with some improvements to the dam. And then really starting to assess and set aside funding for natural infrastructure projects. So those are not hard buildings where we have been pretty good at setting money aside, but these are things like ponds and lakes and the natural ecological restoration that is needed. And then certainly continuing our improvement to facilities with all of the wildfires, looking at assessing our facilities for the proper air quality response, building the service yard at Coyote Hills, and improving park residents and our archives. Those are included in the budgets. And as always, continuing our land acquisition priorities and implementing the commitments to the voters in Measure FF and Measure WW. So those are some of the highlights. If you've been here before, you kind of know our budget process. We have an opportunity, staff and the board meet 5 times at the beginning of the year. They have 5 board workshops in the spring. And then it's in August that we get our revenue projections and put those forward. Then in the summertime, we're putting together our budget requests and reviewing those and putting together this draft budget that was out on the street on November 18th. I know the board of directors got them and they were mailed to the PAC Finance Committee members. I'm not sure if you've received them yet, but I hope you all had the opportunity to see the budget online on our website. And then we have our public process. We had the board finance committee meeting this afternoon. We're meeting with you here tonight. We did have an all staff budget meeting and it was done on Zoom also. We had about over 50 people joining and that was last week. And then in December, we have our introduction and our first public hearing on December 1st before the board of directors. And then our second public hearing and the adoption is on December 15th. The December 1st meeting is an evening meeting this year. It'll start at 6 p.m. So as always, I'm gonna we refer to the mission statement of the Park District. The East Bay Regional Park District preserves a rich heritage of natural and cultural resources and provides open space, parks, trails, safe and healthful recreation and environmental education, and environmental ethic guides the district in all that we do. And so utilizing that and setting our performance goals, our district-wide performance goals, are pulling some of the vision statements straight out of the 2013 master plan And then from there, we try to match up our objectives with the things that are listed in that policy document. So today I'm going to go over some of the objectives that are included in this budget. And some of we've accomplished a lot in 2020, but certainly there's some carryover of some of our items due to COVID-19. So one of the major focuses is fostering a safe visitor experience. And here we are continuing to develop protocols. We've been working on our safety protocols and providing information on that. That will continue into 2021 as things continue to change. Promoting the police department values of safety, service, and stewardship, and training police personnel on procedural justice practices. Continuing with our hazardous tree program. As I mentioned, the public information campaign has been extraordinary during this pandemic, and also focusing on wildfires, so that will continue. And then we do, in our budget, we are anticipating that we will have a modified summer season, including swimming. And so we will continue to provide lifeguard services and swimming lessons as we always have in a modified way, according to what the health orders provide. Enhance visitors' relationship to nature. Here we're focusing on continuing the virtual educational programming. I hope you've had a chance to see on our website. The naturalist and INR staff have really been extraordinary at providing services to the public and to schools. We are going to embark on inventorying our natural surface trails. Of course, we have most of them mapped with the new acquisitions we've made. We're going to go ahead and update a trails inventory and get that in our database. Continuing to develop interpretive signage, specifically at Point Pinole. And then also using community surveys. We had an opportunity this year to really engage the public and do some community surveys to see what their needs were and how they were responding to us during the pandemic. And we will continue doing that in order to develop Park District programs and services that are of interest to the public. Ensuring the fiscal health of the Park District. Continuing to engage with our local legislators. We've been very successful bringing them out into the parks, and especially since we do manage several state parks, right? We manage the Del Val, we manage Crown Beach, and McLaughlin East Shore State Park. And so getting assistance financially from state legislators and other local legislators has been great for us. We've gotten funding for those projects, the McCosker Creek project, the Brickyard project, and the Del Val Water project and Visitor Center. Also examining our options for managing and reducing our long-term liabilities and addressing our future needs. That includes opening new parks and planning for the impacts of a changing climate. We do plan on issuing our next tranche of Measure WW capital bonds that are used for acquisition and development, a portion of them being green bonds like they were when we issued in 2017. And then continuing our long-range financial planning. In this time of uncertainty, it really is helpful to look back at how we've dealt with past recessions and to look forward at what our anticipated future costs are and the projects and operations. Planning for climate change resiliency. As we mentioned before, land acquisition is a huge priority for the district, preserving land, managing land, and noting that these open spaces do play a strong part in mitigating the impacts of climate change. We have been involved with other agencies doing a risk assessment to identify vulnerabilities along our shoreline as it relates to sea level rise. And then also continuing to do planning, maintenance, and habitat restoration work for the Hayward shoreline. We have had many projects out there, but now we're kind of embarking on the big picture of the the Hayward Marsh. And then this year we got a chance to really try out these telecommuting technologies. They all seem to be working really well. So next year we'll be developing strategies and policies to continue to be able to have virtual meetings so that we can reduce our travel and maybe right size our fleet and manage greenhouse gases. Next, we have improving access to public parklands and outreach to underrepresented groups. In our finance committee meeting, we did really talk about, defining underrepresented groups and making sure we start to track and, collect some data on who we're able to serve and maybe areas that we're not serving as much. So here we've had projects to improve ADA access. This year we did the repaved shoreline trail at Crown Beach and have done lots of other projects. In this year's budget, we're looking at Don Castro and improving routes to the facility and the parking area, along with, I think we're committed to at least 10 other ADA improvements and looking at our self-evaluation plan, like I mentioned. And then also we've been collaborating with flood control and the city of Oakland for extension of the San Leandro Creek Trail from Hagenberger to 98th Avenue. And then there's a few really big projects that are coming out of our Human Resources Department, district-wide projects. One, initiating a community equity assessment that reviews the distribution of programs and services across our diverse communities. And also opening multilingual exhibits to provide interpretive opportunities. So as part of our diversity initiatives, we will be reviewing our recruitment, retention, and other employment conditions with the goal of, having a diverse and inclusive workplace. We'll be having mandatory training on fairness in hiring and interviewing for our supervisors and managers, and really, digging deep into that area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll continue to prioritize employee safety, updating our safety protocols and our providing training and safety equipment, and conducting a safety gap analysis at Park District facilities, including look at air quality response requirements. And here, this this photo here is the general manager. Alice Kinner, Alan Love from Public Safety, Public Affairs, worked very hard with our health officials. So these are our public health officers in doing all these different public service announcements and assisting with how we develop our protocols and our procedures. And so this is just a picture of them filming out at Lake Temescal for those commercials. And here the photo is of Dunbar and Quarry Campground. They continue to make progress out there. And although it still looks like a construction site, in the last presentation, they said that they were going to have hundreds of trees added after the construction is finished. So we hope to have that open to the public next year in 2021. And it's the newest campground in the Bay Area, the newest family campground in the Bay Area. So we're going to be really excited to open that up. We continue to work on our land use plans at Las Trampas and to get started on some of the areas where we have new land acquisitions. And then being mindful that the drought is cyclical and it is, it's going to come back and hit us. So really working on improving irrigation and putting some drought resistant turf in certain areas of our parks, including Miller Knox. And then, as I mentioned, a second small trails crew is recommended by the general manager in order to maintain, our natural surface trails out there. We made a lot of progress on our pilot program that happened this year, even during COVID. And so we want to extend that for next year, taking baby steps in that area. Restore, preserve, and protect the scenic, natural, and cultural resources of the district. Again, a huge huge initiative that the Park District has had for many years is to continue our fuels reduction work. Our fire department leads that up, and we have been spending over $3 million over the last 2 years on this program, a significant amount coming from the general fund and from the FEMA grants that we still are eligible for. Conducting the feasibility study for restoration options at Jewel Lake. And then also, I mentioned before, the grazing infrastructure is included in this budget. And you know, the board approved an initiative to eliminate the use of glyphosate in developed park areas. And so that requires additional equipment. We have additional staff in this budget and supplies, and that is a big initiative that Operations Division implemented this year and will continue implementing next year. And so there's many in the budget for that.
Are they pretty big? Would I be overdoing it?
So that's the end of the performance goals section.
Like some are small, some are big. So it's like,
I
right.
think Francis is not good. Can somebody help me out with that? Let's, thank you. All right, so I can't see if anyone has any burning questions or if you'd like me to proceed on the rest of the presentation and go through the verse first.
I don't see any hands at this point, so I'd say let's go ahead and move forward.
I see one.
Neil has his hand up.
Neil, okay.
Great. Thanks for that presentation so far, Deborah. I guess I was wondering if in the discussions during the workshops or in other settings, if there has been talk of including as a performance objective an inventory of biodiversity or a project to archive biodiversity in local natural history museums. I know we have similar things going for cultural resources and for like roads and trails, as you described. And it seems like, you know, an important component of the parks is the biodiversity, and knowing which species are where and how that's changing through time is something that would be important for us to know now, as well as future people that are involved in the management of the parks.
That sounds great. I don't have that on my list this year, but our stewardship department has really, you know, they've been doing a lot of work in that area, and we can get back to you if there's any specific projects that just aren't listed in the budget items. We can get back to you in the committee on what the stewardship department's doing in that area of biodiversity.
Or maybe the process is to, you know, start. I mean, the train has left the station, I think, for this year, but next year, as we go through the process again with the workshops, to try and develop a performance indicator metric that, you know, can start us moving in a systematic way towards both inventorying the biodiversity in the parks and then, you know, archiving specimens.
Mm-hmm. That sounds great.
Thank you.
I saw two other people with their hand raised.
Yes, Vice Chair Obringer has a question.
Thank you. Yeah, so I appreciate everything I keep seeing the Park District do in terms of diversity and bias training. And I'm just wondering, is there a baseline? Do you have a sense of what the makeup is? And I'm asking this too in light of the public comment that we heard earlier. So in terms of at different levels within the organization, is there diversity? Is that one of the goals as well? And have you established a baseline and then goals to which you hope to aspire, or how do you anticipate that working?
Thank you for that question. The Board of Directors just received our most recent workforce diversity report, and that was presented at the last meeting. So I would encourage you to go and make sure you get the link to where that is. But we did, this year, we did some inventorying, and so we do have data on our current status. And, We have also, I think at the last meeting, we've approved a contract to engage a consultant to help us analyze and take us through the next steps of analysis and do exactly what you're suggesting of proposing the goals and trying to improve along that path.
Great, thank you. And I'll go back and I'll watch that agenda item from the board meeting. Thank you.
And there's one other question from Igor Skardov.
I can't hear you yet, Igor.
There, is that better?
Yes, there you go.
Well, louder anyway. I also would like to follow up on a couple of the goal items, in particular having to do with two areas. One of them has to do with fires. And I know that we have had a very highly active fuel suppression, fuels reduction program going on. And I was wondering if we had any metrics on how to compare the performance of those lands versus non-treated lands in terms of mitigating fire damage. I think that we all kind of intuitively know that it's a good thing to do that, but it would be really good to have some hard data that shows, well, here's sort of parallel areas that burned and how this one responded compared to how that one did, or things like that. That would be extremely helpful, I think, to get some numbers around these goals. The other one also has to do with the JEDI kind of issues. I was thinking particularly in regards to our law enforcement activities. Law enforcement seems to be kind of placed in a position where if there's going to be a problem, that they're going to be at some point having to be engaged in it. And so that the most acute area where issues can surface would be there. And I was wondering if there are any plans to provide additional training or resources or other kind of tactical or operational infrastructure training or facilities or what I'm trying to say. Resources is what I'm looking for to help make this happen and to help move us into a place where that stops to be an issue. Not saying that it is an issue in our park. For what all I know, I haven't heard of any at all. So I'm hoping that that's because there haven't been. But I think an ounce of prevention is a good thing to have.
Thank you for those comments. I think Chief Chiaburo might be able to respond to that.
Hi, Deborah. Good afternoon. Hello, Igor. Good afternoon, everyone. Anthony Chiaburo, your AGM of Public Safety and your Chief of Police. And Deborah, can you hear me? Just want to do a sound check.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. So great questions. The first one I'll take on the fuels management, the fuels issue. The observation we always make just right from the start is grazed land versus non-grazed land. And that's kind of a non-scientific way that we can look at fuel land that is managed versus land that isn't. And I can tell you, for example, there's some lands that maybe the state manages, which they don't do grazing. So we do see a difference there in terms of light flashy fuels, which are the grasses. As we get deeper into that, that's a greater question for our fuels management people. So I will have to ask them that. They are deep into the science of fuels management. And I can tell you, I've seen the people that we've hired. So I'm pretty sure they would have that answer or be able to at least explain that. So point noted on that. And then the next part is absolutely the police department is very much in a professional state in terms of what we're doing. And of course, that starts with our hiring of people. We want to hire the right people. We want to train the right people, and then we want to retain the right people. We are heavily involved in procedural justice. which is looking at a contract from start to finish. Is it fair and transparent? There are 4 tenets to procedural justice, which are voice, neutrality, trust, and respect. And those really have to be undertaken when we're contacting someone. And of course, I'm giving you, Igor, you're a state guy, so you're going to ask me tough questions. You're a fellow Spartan, and that's just a real small insight to what we do in terms of our approach to professionalism. We are a CALIA agency, which is the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. Less than 5 or fewer than 5% in the agencies in the country are CALIA. That's an additional third-party look at our department. In other words, we're 100% transparent, and we have an outside body look at our department annually. And then every 4 years, they come and audit us. This year it was virtual. So that's another way via which we stay contemporary with our practices. And we have ongoing training because of CALIA that exceeds state standards. So I gave you a little bit of a description there, but certainly we are a professional department. And again, that's due to who we are as a district. It's due to our embracing of CALIA. And by the way, the roots of CALIA are with NOBLE, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, the National Sheriff's Association, the Police Executive Research Forum is also one of those that started CALIA. So much in CALIA, and also the state of California. We have very robust laws in this state. So that's another way that we stay on top of things. But great question. And I'm certainly, that's something we can certainly come back and talk about.
Thank you, Chief. Let's see, any other questions?
I don't see other questions. No hands are raised, but if you have questions, speak up.
All right, well, I'll keep going and we can certainly ask more questions at the end. I appreciate that. All right, so now we're going to dive into the numbers and I will try to keep it interesting. So for this year, we do have a balanced budget using planned expenditures, transfers, and use of fund balance. District-wide, it's $258.5 million. So on the resource side, this includes our transfers. Remember, we have several funds and we are required in some cases to move money around from place to place. And I'll just say that our total resources overall are $9.4 million less than they were in the 2020 budget. And our taxes and assessments do show some growth in the regular property tax area. They're about 4.1% of an increase, but the debt levy portion of our taxes and assessments went down because our debt service tables didn't require additional money. So that dropped by 20 million. So your total taxes and assessments are 176.4. Fees and charges. So this is the area where during this current year, 2020, we had to reduce our budget by $7.2 million because we were not able to put on any programs. We didn't have a swim, we didn't have a summer season. We didn't rent out facilities or have any kind of programming. And so we had to adjust our budget. So going forward, we are anticipating that all of those kinds of programs that are affected by COVID-19 will be at 50% of what they would be in a normal year. So we are going to go back to charging our regular park fees, but we anticipate only 50% from our concessionaires, 50% of normal revenue for camping, for any kind of facility rental, things like that. Events will likely be less than that because of the amount of time that it takes for people to plan things. So that's a reduction of $2.2 million from our 2020 year. It's down by 7.3%. Contracts and leases, those are our grazing agreements, our contracts for using our land for things like communication towers and such. That's about the same. And then interest and donations are down by 28%, the majority of that being in the area of interest, right? The Fed raised the rates up, so we got excited and we budgeted during this year. It looks like we will be hitting our interest revenue target, but now it's dropped back down to 0. And so we won't be getting as much interest next year. And then other resources are where we're transferring our funds around from one fund to another. So here's another picture of all of that. As I mentioned, property tax is very significant for us. 84% of our district-wide revenue is from property tax. And we look hard at property tax. Since we're a calendar year, we have the benefit of the county assessors telling us what they levied for the first 6 months of our year. And then the second 6 months, we rely on our consultants. Now, another member of the PAC Finance Committee said, well, what if people don't pay their bills? Well, you know, even though our assessed valuation is showing that it's not shrinking, therefore our revenue shouldn't be shrinking. Certainly there could be delinquencies, or there could be some legislation that says you don't have to pay your taxes right away, could defer them, and the Park District will have to accommodate that. We do have some reserve policies for things exactly like property taxes being delayed in payment. We can draw on reserves for that exact thing. Our charges for services, again, I shared that we reduced that by 7.3% of what it would have been in a normal year. Property usage is about 1% along with interest and interagency agreements. So now to the appropriations side, our Park District-wide appropriations are 258.5 million. The general fund, the operating section of our budget is 174 million. Total projects, including transfers, 27.5. Our debt service is 13 million, which is much less than last year. It was 29 million. Internal service activities, which include our internal charges for general liability, workers' compensation, some employee benefits, and our infrastructure fund and our major equipment fund are all included in there. Those are about the same, just slightly increased. And special revenue funds include our lighting and landscaping district revenue, our Measure FF revenue, which this is the first year we're fully implementing Measure FF, and things like that. Projects are down from last year, or at least the amount we're budgeting. We still hope to get grants and additional things during the year. And I just wanted to point out that we are, we're able to grow slightly, even though we are facing this economic uncertainty. So there are a few areas where we're using some of our fund balance. For debt service, we had already needed to levy those debts. Now we're drawing on them. For projects, we already have that Measure WW funding there. We're drawing on that. And then for things like purchase of equipment, we have in our budget the replacement of 2 Type 6 fire apparatus. We're drawing on our major equipment reserve fund for things like that. And so looking at our appropriations by type, it's not surprising that the majority of our appropriations are for personnel services. We are a service-based organization. Supplies and services are about the same as last year. And then, what else do I have here? Oh, supplies and services are up by less than 10%. And then capital outlay is down mainly because last year, or in the 2020 year, we appropriated additional funding for land acquisition. And this year we're in pretty good shape. So if we do need any additional funding for land acquisition, we'll go to the board mid-year, but we didn't make a big appropriation for that. Interagency agreements include our local grant program. This is where the Measure WW funds are granted out to other communities for developing parks and recreation in their jurisdictions. And we're at the last years of it. We extended that program for a couple of years. And so there's a big chunk of 14 million included in that slice. So those are really the big appropriations by category, by type. And then I just want to talk about our, let's see, I know some of you add up these numbers, so I want to make sure you understand. We have our appropriations and our transfers out, and then we're using our fund balance, like I mentioned, to come up with our total uses of fund balance. And so that's a little bit different than what I said our budget was of 158, because you have to add back those transfers. That's not too confusing. So now let's talk about staffing. So our proposed staffing in this budget includes funding our authorized positions. So within our current budget, we're funding 100% of our authorized positions, including their retirement, their medical costs, and whatever the costs are in accordance with certain already authorized MOU contracts. And then we're requesting to add 12.9 full-time equivalents to this budget, and I'll go over those in more detail. Some of that is for managing the elimination of glyphosate in developed areas. In most years, we have something what we call pipeline, whereas when we're opening new parks, we allocate the staffing for that. This year, we examined those areas where we thought parks were going to open that have not yet been funded, and we didn't see anything that was urgent. And so we deferred any of those. We really think they're not going to be open until either the end of the year or the beginning of 2022. So things like Dunbarton Quarry Campground already included in the budget because we thought we would be able to open it this year. There are certain projects out there that already had the funding, like Judge John Sutter Shoreline that opened up this year. Those positions are already funded. So I think we're in pretty good shape there. With the implementation of Measure FF, we are continuing a lot of the staffing that is a continuation from Measure CC, although Measure FF provides for 3 additional FTEs. 1.5 of those are in operations and 1.5 are in stewardship. Also, when you look at the ads, the 12.9, you can see the breakdown. The majority of these positions are represented positions. And so let's see, 82% are represented by Ask Me Local 2428, 10%, which is 1.25 FTEs is for the Police Association, and there's 1 unrepresented FTE in the HR department. So here we go by division. The legislative and executive division also has human resources as part of it, and we are adding 2 FTEs for the human resources department. They've gone over lots of transition, and with all that's been going on, they're really under-resourced. At our finance committee meeting just this afternoon, the board finance committee recommended that we add an additional HR analyst to that. So when we present to the board on December 1st, that will be a number of 3. We'll have a recommendation to approve 3 based on the finance committee's request. And then in finance and management services, we have 1 information services technician with all this technology. That's a COVID response type. There's a lot more technology needs today than there was yesterday. The stewardship, the acquisition, stewardship, and development department, it's really just the Measure FF positions that are added, the 1.5. And in operations, there's many park rangers and a equipment mechanic to address the new equipment that we're getting from glyphosate, and some upgrades of 9-month positions to be 12-month positions. We've been doing that over time. And then in the public safety division, we have our 3 new fire crew members, a police services technician, and 0.25 of an officer in that division. So those are the staffing. Here you can see over the last several years, we have really been able to add many new staff to the Park District, a lot of them out in the field. And this year, based on the uncertainty and the way the budget projections are looking, we really tried to minimize that. And we know that we just have to hold tight because sometimes in a recession, things happen in the out years. So 2 years from today, we can still be considering some tightening of our budgets. So limiting the base budget growth, the ongoing growth, by limiting the number of new positions is helpful. So that's really the operating side. Now I have a few slides just to talk to you about the projects and program budget. So that's volume 2 of our budget report. And we've made a lot of improvements to that book in the last couple of years. We tried to really say, here are the capital projects, and then here are some ongoing programs, and separate them in the front and back of the book to make it a little more clear. And so hopefully that's been useful for any of you that have looked at our budget over the years. The programs, the area that we've consolidated a lot of different, what we still will call projects, into a program area. We have resource enhancement, public access, technology and equipment, infrastructure, and land acquisition. Those are some of the categories that you can find in our budget. And then these are funded at different levels. Now remember, our projects and our programs are multi-year budgets. So we're really in this 2021 year, we're adding another $10.5 million. But the overall budget is almost $400,000, right? Because it's years of adding to these projects. And as you know, it takes years for projects to be completed. So some of the new things included in this budget are adding another $100,000 to the remediation for the former gun club at Anthony Chabot. We've been funding that for its environmental restoration that will come. We've been looking at Black Diamond mines, and I think you all know that we opened up the coal mine is completed. We finished the stairs. Now we're looking at the back timber inside the mine that frames the inside of the mine, and doing an analysis of what improvements need to be done there. The Peralta Oaks North is really just, I think, moving some money from a closed project into that. That's very minimal. We have already a project budget for the design of that building. And then Point Malati, Measure FF had some money set aside for extending the Bay Trail, so that's included in the budget. And Point Isabel, continuing to look at restoration and stabilization of that area. So here are some of the big projects that I said are multi-year, and just to give you a glimpse of what's included in that beautiful second volume, we have at Contra Loma Regional Park, we're continuing to improve facilities out of there. We get a lot of grant funding for that, but we have contributed $500,000 of our own major infrastructure replacement and renovation funds. Those are kind of general funds set aside for infrastructure. And then at Coyote Hills, we talked about how we're going to open the campground. And next to that campground is developing a service yard that will serve both the regional park and the Dunbarton Quarry campground. And that's paid for with the tipping fees that we have received from filling up the big hole that's out there, which it's now, they showed us pictures, it's now filled up, and they're starting to build up the hill. At Martin Luther King Jr. Shoreline, we've been working on developing an extension of the San Francisco Bay Trail along the park. And we are still in the process of securing funding for that. We have secured already $7.1 million, and there might have even been a recent grant that we just received that isn't included in these numbers. But that design project is underway, and once we get the funding completed, we can go to construction. Developing Brickyard Cove, which is located in McLaughlin East Shore State Park. We are going to be putting in the plaza, the picnic sites, restrooms, some parking there, and that's all funded with state grant appropriations. continuing the extension of the San Francisco Bay Trail up on the Delta side near Martinez. We're working on a project there from the Nedgedly staging area to Baralessa Street. That needs more funding also. Here's one that is in process and is fully funded. The largest creek restoration project the Park District's ever gone through, $13.6 million, with really only $3 million coming from WW from the district. And developing the trail to Mount Diablo. We're working on the Tasahara Creek corridor. And I think we'll still need additional funding for that. In the design phase. And as I mentioned before, the additional ADA improvements out at Don Castro, that's funded by, we do set money aside every year for improving ADA. So that's funded by that and our infrastructure program. So that is the end of the project budget. As I mentioned before, we're going to go to the board of directors 2 times in December. The December 1st meeting is at 6 p.m. It'll be on Zoom. And the December 15th meeting will be at 1 o'clock. That concludes my report. Happy to answer any questions. And then we'll be looking for the full Park Advisory Committee to recommend the adoption of the budget to the full board of directors. So I'm going to my screen. And
no questions?
Yeah, there are several hands up. I see.
Okay, they're not raised on the participants list. And I can't see the whole picture, but you have a question? Neil?
Yeah, so I was, so last year at this meeting, well, first, thanks for this part of the presentation as well. It's always eye-opening and informative for me. I learned a lot from it. So last year at this meeting, I had a question about how the Park District might be preparing for an economic downturn. And one of the tools that you said was available to the Park District was the fact that about 45% of our projects are like one-time funds. And so that gives some flexibility to respond to conditions. And so I was wondering, in this budget, have we started to reduce some of those one-time funds in anticipation of a downturn, or do we feel like we're not there yet? Or where are we on that?
so part of the district's budget strategy is to never really appropriate all of the growth to ongoing things, right? So if, for instance, your property tax growth looked like it was $5 million, we would not recommend adding $5 million worth of staff, because then you don't have any room. So that's exactly what you're recalling, is that our regular strategy is 50% for the base budget ongoing growth and 50% one time, so that we have room if things go down. Last year in the 2020 budget, or else, this year's 2020 budget, and in this 2021 budget, we continued to do the 45% growth is for ongoing and 55% for one time. And so that does provide a little extra flexibility of how to manage things going forward.
Okay, great, thank you.
Let's see, there were some other
questions. Oh, Carlin.
Thank you. So along similar lines, so I know that you've talked about adding staff. And so kind of 2 questions. One is, right now we are, amazingly, property values are holding. And I know that that's a large percentage of the revenue stream for the Park District. But over time, as we add more employees, whether it's the city or the Park District, there's also the pension piece. So how does that play into your financial planning as you're adding more people? Are you also able to cover the pension obligations for the new staff?
Thank you for asking that. I failed to remind everyone that we did establish the pension trust in order to fund those long-term liabilities I think in 2017, and we have each year contributed to that trust fund that will allow us to draw down on those funds as pension costs rise. And this year in the budget, we are adding an additional $1 million to that trust. We have not drawn on those funds yet. I think they're over $8 million now. And they're really for set aside for two reasons: to help us smooth the rates if there is some volatility in our PERS rates, and to help us cover the gap of when our pension costs are estimated to drop down a little bit. Some due to remember the act, the PEPRA Act, that reduced pension benefits for future employees. And so I think when we do build our budget and we do request any new full-time equivalent positions, we cost out the whole entire thing. So we cost out the medical benefits and the what they call the normal cost of that position. So that's included. And the Park District has been working on managing pension costs by not only setting up the pension trust, but also there's two other actions the board has been taking lately. And that is, one, we've been PERS set up a situation where you can either pay your unfunded liability monthly over the 12-month period, or you can pay it in advance every 6 months and save on the interest that's accrued. We've been doing that. So we're sending, larger chunks to PERS at a discounted amount because they take out that accumulated interest cost. That's one way. And then also the board at mid-year, when we do find that we have extra funds, we call them opportunity funds, the board has authorized us to pay down certain, they call them allocation layers, which will also drop our costs in the future, which will create a long-term savings. So there's like 3 different ways. Some of them are more immediate, where we can smooth our rates if we need to, like in the next year, if PERS rates spike, we can draw on the trust. And then the other 2 things are really reducing our long-term cost and creating some long-term savings.
Thank you.
Great. Linda DeChambeau, I believe you have a question.
Yes, I do. Thank you. It's just such a fabulous presentation. It's just really overwhelming to see how much great work is getting done. Thank you for that. So eye-opening. An interest and a specialty of mine, I'm curious about some of these new lands, a lot of them going back to our field trip. I remember at Oyster Bay, it came to mind about the fill, the industrial fill. It's come up with Concord Hills. I hear tonight with refurbishing the gun lot. There's quarry lands, there's, railroad ties. So where I'm going with this is the potential toxic or hazardous waste material there, and wondering if it's buried in or accounted for, and maybe the land use planning and design, or some of that's upfront loaded before you take the land, but certainly some type of monitoring. I was at EPA for 21 years and the CERCLA cleanup site. I'm just curious. I did see some notices recently that Brownfields has loosened up its application process because of the COVID and the flexibility. But I'm just curious if there's some line items in there for something like that to make sure that it just seems like some of these newly acquired lands may have some heavily loaded costs, but worth the cost to avoid the long-term risks while we're protecting human health and the environment.
Great question. So when we are contemplating acquiring new land, of course, they do a phase 1 and they do all that kind of different review so that we know what we're getting. It doesn't necessarily mean we're not going to take it, right? We have all the shoreline and we know that that has a lot of issues. So our ASD division is really the ones tasked with that work. So the land acquisition department is part of that, and they do the preliminary evaluation. And And then before we can develop it, right, the design and construction department, really those project managers have to work with our consultants and go out and make those assessments. For instance, Brickyard Cove, we did have to remove a lot of soil there, and we had to have it moved, we had to pay to have it moved out to wherever they take the soil that nobody else wants. And then I guess, you know, everyone that's in the dirt market knows us. And if they do have clean fill, I think there's a lot of situations where they're offering to us, they don't have to pay the tipping fees to places like Dunbarton Quarry, right? There's all kinds of testing and regulations about what types of fill we would take. And so sometimes we don't have to pay for that, but then at Brickyard Cove, we had to put additional fill to raise it up and do the grading that we wanted to make the park and the trails just like we did. Another example is out at Tidewater. We're redesigning that park and we're trying to accommodate sea level rise in our design. So we are working on getting clean fill to go ahead and raise up the level of that park before we actually do the development on it. So we are constantly analyzing those types of things and trying to do our best to not have it be really very expensive.
So you would say, I mean, kind of the bottom line question I had is how's that impacting, since this is our agenda item, the budget? It sounds like you haven't really seen, you're finding ways around it. We don't really see a need to, even though we're increasing those types of land necessarily to increase the budget, or seeing that planning for that type of increase at this time.
Well, actually our budget does include some of that. So over the last several years, we've contributed $1 million per year. I think we're up to over $6 million accumulated for the restoration of the gun club. So this year we put in 100,000 because we're shrinking our budget a little bit. And then also we have at mid-year, right? These are things that we do think about when we have opportunity funds. At our mid-year budget 2020, we did set aside an extra $1 million for the uncertainties. So we have in your document, there's a program called environmental restoration, and it has $1 million in it. And so that's in there, but it's managed on a project by project basis. Does that help? Okay.
Yeah, I think Andy Carey has a question.
I do. First, thank you for the presentation. Is there in the documents that were included with the package, there's reference to detailed cost line items, I guess, for some of the capital improvements? Now, I didn't find that in my document. I'm really curious if that's available to us to look at. That's one question.
Andy, I'm not sure I understand what your question is.
Well, what my real question is, we have a list of capital improvements, for example, the restoration of the creek. But that seems to be, there seems to be other things that are in other parks that are not sometimes at high level. I'd like to see some of those kinds of things. It's not going to stop me from voting for this, but I'd like to be able to look at them in the future. That's one question. The second question has to do with, we spent a lot of time this year talking about Mission Peak and the parking issues there. Is this shelved for this year, or is there some hidden line item I didn't see?
The Mission Peak creating additional parking is a project within our project budget. There is no new appropriation requested, so I didn't highlight it, but it does have funding. It does have funding for that project.
Excellent. That's the kind of information I'd like to be able to identify.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I think, maybe we can talk to you offline. The budget, it does have so many different little spreadsheets and summaries. We can probably point you in the direction of what you're looking for.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Irene's hand, but Annie, did you have a question? No? Okay, Irene.
Yes, I'm just wondering if the park expansion at Crab Cove, how does that fit into next year's budget?
Great question. A couple of years ago, we were fortunate to acquire the GSA properties, and there is some funding set aside for design of that. I wish I had an ASD person here that could give you a better update, but I know that there is a little bit of funding there to start that design work. And I think, I don't know if Jim O'Connor knows, there was a site visit out there recently to, make an assessment of what's out there. So that's definitely a project. Jim, do you have any update on that at all?
I don't, Deborah. I'm sorry about that.
Okay. We'll have to get back to you on more details, but I know there's definitely things being talked about for those properties.
Okay, thank you.
And Eric might have more information.
Yeah, Deborah, Irene, the current project that we're working on there is dealing with the wastewater line along McKay Avenue and trying to get that road fixed up. So we've been talking with the state on possibly providing some funding for that through Prop 68. And so the site for the GSA property that we were that you were very helpful in terms of making sure that we were able to acquire it. There are some preliminary designs on that, but it's going to be a fairly costly item. So we're going to accumulate funding over time to try to get something going out there. But we are very aware that there is an expectation now that we have the property to develop it.
Okay, thanks, Eric.
Great. Okay, I don't see any more hands, and we do need to move on to other items. Linda Best, would you like to make a motion for a recommendation?
Yes, Chair Record, I would move that the PAC recommend adoption of the proposed 2021 budget to the Board of Directors.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second. Michael Gregory.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? If not, Madam Secretary, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair Rickard. Vice Chair Obringer.
Sorry, I'm here. Yes.
Member Best.
Aye.
Member Brubaker.
Aye.
Member Burke.
Aye.
Member Carey.
Aye.
Member DeChambeau.
Aye.
Member Dieter.
Aye.
Member Gregory.
Aye.
Member Ho.
Aye.
Member Lacey.
Aye.
Member Nason.
Aye.
Member Robinson.
Aye.
Member San Juan.
Aye.
Member Skardoff.
Aye.
Member Satsui.
Aye.
Member Williams.
Aye.
And Chair Rickard.
Aye.
The ayes have it.
Great. Thank you, Deborah. Our next item is where am I here? Oh, is the overview of Park District funding sources by Deborah Spalding.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Deb Spalding, and the presentation I'm going to make today, I think you can think of it as a companion to all the budget information that you just heard from Deborah. So this is kind of taking a step back, not looking exactly at the 2021 budget, but looking at different funding sources. And hopefully it'll be helpful as you're looking at the 2021 budget. You heard about it today. Maybe you'll again go back to it and look at it online. So I'm going to share my screen. One moment. Can you guys see that all right?
Yes.
Just need to play the slideshow from the beginning. All right, so first I'm going to talk about our operating budget, our operating funds, and our operating budget, as you just saw, our 2021 budget, that's how much it costs to operate the Park District for 1 year, for the whole year of 2021. And as you also have no doubt heard and seen, there's never enough money, right? There's always more demands than there are resources. This is a slide that's similar to one you just saw, but it's mapping new positions over the past 10 years against total acreage. So our park district continues to grow, and we keep acquiring new land, and we have new facilities and trails and services that we want to provide to people. And so we need our revenues to keep growing too. We really can't stay stagnant. And we're very fortunate in that property taxes are our main source of revenue here. So I know a lot of you guys work in other government agencies, or you're familiar with how they work. And so if we had a really unstable funding source like property tax, sales tax as our main funding source, it would be really much harder to manage. But property tax, because it's based on the assessed value, and because we have this huge 2-county base, all Alameda and Contra Costa County that we're able to draw from, it tends to be quite stable. And so that's 84% of our revenue. And of course, you guys know, since you live here, assessed values, the value of houses keeps going up, or it almost always has. And so we've been fortunate that we've had this steady increase, but there have been times in our history when that hasn't been the case. And looking back at the Great Recession in 2008 and 9, our property tax revenue actually went down. And if you go back even further than that, we had losses of property taxes from the state taking away funds, but borrowing money and then not paying it back for several years. So many general managers and board members over time have sought to diversify our revenue sources with different types of special taxes and assessments. So I was just going to show you guys, and you're again probably all familiar with this, but here's your typical Alameda County property tax bill. And the thing that I find so interesting is that we actually get revenue in 4 different ways from just this one parcel. And so some ways are more obvious than others, but well, I guess I'll show you on the future slide. So one way we get revenue is just that 1% of property taxes that everybody pays. And it's just a big bucket of 1%, but we actually get a portion of that 1%, but our name's not on it. So nobody really sees, oh, I'm paying this much for East Bay Parks. They just know that they're paying that 1%. And kind of behind the scenes, there's a formula there that some of that revenue goes to the park district. So on the right-hand side, this is actually from Contra Costa County, not Alameda County, but you can see in this one tax rate allocation area how that 1% gets divvied up, and it varies across the 2 counties by town, based on what agreements were made in the past long ago. So if you look down 5th from the bottom, there's our little sliver of the 1%. But the person paying the property tax bill doesn't know that they're paying that. They just know, hey, 1% of my bill is going away to government services. Down a little further on this slide, you see that's our debt levy. So this was last year, and it was 0.006%. So that does have our name on it, and we have made a promise to voters that we will keep that below $10 per 100,000 of assessed valuation. And again, we think that really helps, buoy the park district so people don't see us as trying to grab too big of a piece of the pie. All right, and so this is yet another little wedge slice of money that we get. So this is number 3 on this list that I've circled, is our 2 county trails. So it's $5.44, very small amount of money to the average property tax payer. But because we're spread across 2 counties, that really ends up being a decent chunk of money that can augment our general fund and can help support the park district. And then the last one there is EBRP Park Safety. So that's our Measure CC, which is now Measure FF. That's kind of cut off on the slide, I think, but it's $12. So we've got these, relatively small assessments, and yet they all sort of help to fund the park district over the year. And so this is just a depiction of two different houses in the two counties. Alameda County, per the California Association of Realtors, this is the median home price as of August 2020. Anyone who bought their house long ago is not going to have such an enormous property tax base, but a recent person would have that base of their property tax value. And then Contra County is a little bit lower. And then here is how this breaks down. I don't know if it's visible to you, but this is actually a page in our budget book that I find really interesting. And it shows how different properties in different parts of the Bay Area pay different amounts. So it's partly based on where you live, but then also, of course, on the value of your home. So just looking at the top line, so those are folks who live in Alameda County, and in this tax rate allocation area there, and this is all assuming that same home price for everybody in Alameda County, so the 1.028 million. And so in Fremont, $335 of that 1% goes to us. And in Oakland, someone who's in this tax rate area, it's $249. And then in Livermore, $344. And they're all paying into our Measure WW bond, helping us pay off our general obligation bonds. Only the person in Oakland is paying that Measure FF tax. And then only these in Fremont and Oakland are paying the East Bay, the 2 county trails, landscaping and lighting district. So the Livermore parcel is not paying that. And then jumping down to Contra County. So this area of Brentwood is in that East County area, and they were annexed to the Park District later on. And so they pay almost nothing in their property tax. We get 8 cents from that 1% of whatever that home value is. They do pay into our Measure WW bond. And we have this additional assessment of $19.70. That's our East Contra Costa County LLD Landscaping and Lighting Assessment District. So they're not paying in really much to us, but this was something that was developed in the early 90s, and it's something is better than nothing. In Richmond, they're paying the part of the 1%, the WW bond, the Measure CC, now called Measure FF tax, and the 2 county trails. And then Walnut Creek, $246, the bond, not Measure CC/FF, and the 2 county trails. So it's just kind of interesting how different places are paying different amounts of taxes to the Park District. One question is maybe on your mind is, what's the difference between a tax and an assessment? And it really comes down to how it gets approved. And then there are also restrictions on who can assess taxes. And then once you have approval for that to assess either a parcel or to get a tax, there are certain requirements about how you can spend the money. So just to look at this second one down here, which is relevant to us because we have a few of these, this lighting and special assessment for a landscaping and lighting district for park maintenance. So it's got to be approved by voters, by a majority of voters, and then there's this benefit criteria where we have to provide a special benefit to the people who are paying that assessment. On the other hand, if you have a property-related fee or charge, well, that's not a great example. Sorry, a special tax. Look at the first one. You need 2/3 voter approval, but you don't have to show a special benefit with that tax. So it doesn't have to, we're paying that tax in, we don't have to prove that we're providing a special benefit to the people who are paying. And so this is just another page from our budget, and there's lots of summary information in the front of our budget book in section B. And so this is just some of our special revenue funds. So those are the assessment districts that we have, our 2 county trails, and our East Contra Costa County lighting and landscaping assessment district. And then a couple zones of benefit that we have in very specific areas with just, maybe 100 or a couple thousand houses that are paying in just a little bit of additional revenue. And, it's $4 million in the case of the 2 county LLD, or $766,000 in the case of the East Contra Costa County LLD. But it all helps to provide those additional funds to support Park District operations. Another question, again, in the context of the budget, and I heard people asking this question, is, how are things likely to play out in the future? And there are so many different projections and economists. This is just a very recent item that I found from the State Legislative Analyst Office on November 18th. So they had this chart saying how likely is the state budget to break even. And actually in 2020-21, it's looking really good, which is fantastic. But as you can see in the out years, it gets a little bit less rosy, where they're saying the break-even point, and this blue bar is the, they're saying the odds are that the revenues are going to come in between this range. And so between this range in 2021 to 22 is how much revenue we're going to bring in. And they're saying, we're pretty likely to be able to stay within that budget in 2020 and in 2021. But then as you get into these out years, you can see it's much, the amount of revenue we're going to bring in is not going to be enough to pay for expenses in the state of California. So again, we're always trying to have that long-term perspective here at the Park District and be prepared for what's coming down the road. Okay, so that was on the operating budget. I hope it didn't jump around too much. And now I'm going to talk just a little bit about project funds. And as Deborah talked about, we have hundreds of active projects in the Park District. And in total, about $375 million in projects going on right now at the Park District. And, how do we find the money for all this? And it's really, you don't see it in the budget. You see like $10 million being appropriated right now. And it's kind of like that joke, like, how do you eat an elephant? Really one bite at a time. And so we're only appropriating about $10.5 million in the 2021 budget. And that's because we are constantly looking for grant funds and constantly sort of chipping away at the funding needs for these projects. So we have a grants team that's really active. We have our legislative team that's very active in looking at, what are some possibilities for getting funds for these projects. And so at almost every board meeting, you'll see different projects coming forward in different stages. And they're saying, hey, we found this funding source and we're going to use it for this project. Or we want to allocate some bond funds to help support additional needs that are coming up. And different projects that are going on in the district are able to access different funding sources. And so we have projects such as upgrades to staff offices. We've heard a lot about air quality needs at some of our outlying staff offices. Well, we can't use bond funds for those projects because they're not benefiting the general public. They're only benefiting our staff. And so for something like that, we really do have to use our general fund. We also have our MER funds, which I talked to you guys about at a couple meetings ago, our major infrastructure renovation and replacement funds. And then we have some promissory notes that we issued back in 2012. And so that's our money, district funds, that we're able to use for our own staff facilities. Now for something like a restroom, it's not very, sexy per se. And so maybe we have to pay for that with our general fund. But we might also have Measure FF funds or Measure WW bond funds. Or if we bundle it up with a larger, more compelling project like a staging area or a visitor center, we might be able to get grant funds for That's OPM is the acronym for other people's money. And then for a project that's like an environmental restoration project, such as the McCosker Creek project, well, there are a lot of grant sources out there, federal, state, and local, that we can access for a project like that. So we're always looking for those opportunities. This is a chart that's in our second volume of our budget book, and it's just a summary of all of the grants that have been awarded to the Park District in the last 5 years. And it's just really extraordinary, $103 million in total. And more to come, I'm sure, by the end of the year. This is just through September 30th. And then just again, to give a little more context to the work that our grants department does and how we fund projects. This is from a presentation that Jeff Rasmussen did, who I think has presented to you guys on many other occasions. So this is, you know, funding needed to repair all the damage that was caused back in 2017 when we had those really bad winter storms. We had 117 projects that all needed some degree of work, damage estimates of $8 to $10 million. And applied to FEMA, got approval from FEMA to fund 58 of them. We got some funding from insurance, some were denied. And then here's how that works. We have to come up with matching funds, so 6.25% matching funds, in order to be eligible to get funding from the state or from FEMA. So the fact that we're always, you know, thinking ahead, setting aside money, either in our major infrastructure renovation funds, or we sometimes have some general funds we're able to appropriate, and that helps us get access to really quite a bit of FEMA money. The other thing about FEMA is you're only able to repair something to the level it was at the time it was broken. And so we then are often, you know, finding additional ways to, you know, not just fix it back to how it was, but to make it even better. And so it's always a mixture of funding sources that are coming in, even for something straightforward like, you know, cleaning up a storm damage project. And I believe that is my last slide. I hope that wasn't too disjointed. I'd be happy to take any questions in particular if you have anything that's relevant to the budget that you heard about from Deborah.
Thank you, Deb. Questions, anyone for Deb? No, I guess not. Okay, well, thank you. That was very...
I have a question, Rick.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi. My question is, in Livermore, from what I understand, isn't there something where not all the properties in Livermore are assessed East Bay Regional Park on their property taxes, the assessment?
Yeah, I'm gonna see if I have that in my slide. Yeah, so there is an area in Livermore. I'm blanking on the name of it right now, but Deborah Ocker, do you remember what is that called?
It's Murray Township.
Murray Township.
And I guess the district, when we went out for the Measure AA bonds in 2008, the district had not yet annexed Murray Township. I think that's what Eric Fuller told me. And so, is that right, Eric?
It was when we passed AA in 1988. And we didn't annex the Livermore area until 1992.
Thank you. I got my dates mixed up. And then since Measure WW was a continuation of Measure AA, we did not go ahead and tax that area for Measure WW either.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Carlin, you have a question?
I do, yes. Could you help me understand? So I know that some new parks have opened recently, which is very exciting. So I guess it's a two-part question. So for new parks, once they've opened, is there ongoing funding to support, you know, any operational needs? And what happens with, so there's the land transfer in Concord, with the new park, and there's some land use planning that has been happening, but what has to happen to basically turn the planning into actual like infrastructure development, like picnic sites and trails and things like that. So what is the process for new parks?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that our management and board of directors has really been working on for years. So something like Concord Hills, that's a massive, massive project. You know, looking at just one little aspect of it, we have what's called our pipeline, which maybe you've heard about. Looking at what parks are going to be opening in the future. And with our pipeline, we're always looking 5 years ahead, and we figure out, okay, what are our staffing needs going to be at Concord Hills? And often something as big as that, maybe we'll take it in little chunks, like, okay, first we're going to open up this little area of it. And so we'll need this amount of staffing. And we have made it a priority to fund the pipeline positions first. So we recognize that that's something that's really important, is being able to open the land bank properties. And so pipeline always gets first priority. But you know, something like Concord Hills is really, it's a massive effort, and Deborah may have more insight she can provide on that, but there's going to be funding sources coming in from all sorts of places to help us get everything built out there, all the infrastructure that's needed. Deborah, you want to add to that?
Sure, I'll just add, so the operations of a new park is one piece, and that's what Deb is speaking about with the pipeline. And even for Concord Hills, even though it's not open to the public, you know, a couple of years ago, maybe it's 3 years now, we put 2 public safety positions in the budget to make sure we had staffing to, you know, provide security on that property. And then we added a park ranger so that we can have somebody on the ground. You know, there's, even though a park isn't open, we're still phasing the operational needs. And that mainly, unless there's a special funding source, like a community facilities district or something, will come out of the general fund. But then how do you get a park opened? That's a great question. And Beverly Lane has been working on that for years. It has a lot to do with, you know, planning and permitting and, you know, getting the funds gathered, like she said, from grants in order to actually develop a park. So that's, you know, 2 big, very long-term processes we have out there.
Thank you.
Okay. I see no other questions. This was an information item only, so no action is required. I note that Director Lane has joined us. And Beverly, would you like to take a couple of minutes and talk to us?
Yes, it's really nice to see you. I realized that that I hadn't come to PAC for, I think, this year, and so I talked to Dee about coming to this meeting at the very least. And it's nice to see everybody, however the setting goes. And if I were going to give you a little update, it would be, man, are there a lot of Zoom meetings. It's really extraordinary how we are ratcheting up and trying to have the Zoom meetings be as much like talking to one another around the table as you possibly can. But of course, it's not the same. So there's a lot of that. And for me, you know, I'm staying at home, but I am doing a lot more hiking, you know, than I used to, and really making that effort to get out in the parks. And so what I'm finding is that I can hike a lot further because I'm hiking more. And I actually went to Huckleberry yesterday and got a little lost because I didn't have my brochure, but that is certainly a beautiful park. And certainly, you know, to go to one in a day like that, which was not too hot. And I saw a tremendous number of people out there. So what the board is needing to cope with is keeping our staff safe. And that means that we try not to put rangers two to a truck. And a lot of our staff needs to be homes teaching. And that's everybody from management to our union members. And we're finding that people in the parks tend to be a little stressed. So sometimes they're just a little bit irritated. And so each of us on the board have our things that we would like to see happen. And sometimes we push a little. And one of mine, I had this conversation at a recent meeting, I think it was board, where I was asking about getting the volunteer safety patrol out there in their official capacity. And while they're having their monthly meetings on Zoom, the public safety is reluctant to send them out there officially and end up with these conversations from annoyed people in the field, because people who are following the rules are always upset that someone else is not. And they expect somebody who they see official, as in a ranger or a volunteer safety patrol person, to straighten out those other park users. And then you get into situations that are not a positive educational experience, shall we say. So it's been an interesting, and as we all know, extraordinary year. And then I did have a great time, though, because I was able to go in person and help do the dedication for the Bay Point restoration on over the weekend. I think it was Saturday. And that was really a wonderful thing to be able to open up that particular park, which will serve a lot of underserved population. And it's quite an extraordinary park. So I hope that you'll take the opportunity to find it and enjoy hiking on the new Harrier Trail. And that opening is, of course, on the website. And then finally, there's a lot of discussion about the Concord Hills name for the park. And we are hearing from, we started taking surveys a couple of years ago, and then people came up with names at the July Navy transfer. And then we heard from more people, and both you and the executive committee asked staff to consult, I don't know that that's the formal term, at least talk to Native descendants. And so they did that. And so we have people from diverse communities who want to call the park by different names. And we have Concord said they preferred having a name which included Concord in it. And so I think we're not going to do this tomorrow, but we are trying to finish up with people's suggestions. And then it's going to be a discussion that I think will come to the PAC and come to the executive committee and then to board. And then we will have to be Solomon and make a new name for this park. So that's what I've been doing. Any questions about anything?
Questions for Beverly?
Just good to see you all.
Well.
So I have a question, and I apologize. It seems like all my questions are Concord focused. I apologize for that. But but this question that I have, Director Lane, I know that pre-COVID, there had been the exciting opportunity to potentially have members of the PAC and the public potentially tour the southern part of the, and I'm just calling it the working name, Concord Hills Regional Park. And then COVID hit and that opportunity vanished. So is there still something planned for 2021, assuming there's a vaccine out there and we can gather again on a limited basis?
Well, if we can gather again, I would definitely think that having a chance to visit that, particularly the area south of Bailey Road, which we have indicated would be the first area we would open. I would press for that to be a very early field trip, certainly for the PAC and for the board as well. But right now, we don't have anything scheduled.
Okay, thank you.
But I'll tell people you suggested it. We'll see.
Rochelle, you have a question?
Yeah. Hi. I recall that you have a longstanding interest in art in the parks, and I was curious if anything was moving forward on that front. This is Rochelle Nason from Albany, and our Albany Waterfront Park is an active creative site. So I'm curious about what might be happening with the district on that issue.
Well, we did have an intern do quite a in-depth study on what we were doing and not doing. And so that was a very important first step, but I wouldn't say that there's much of anything happening right now.
Yeah. With
but I will say, you know, I mean, seeing Annie here and having seen the forum that you had, I can't remember the name of it, and doing the greeting from the Native Americans was very moving for me. And I think that one of the things that we need to be talking about is how we're presenting programming and telling people about the Indians who were in the East Bay. And we just, you know, our cultural resources coordinator, Beverly Ortiz, just retired. And so that, you know, having us review what we have in place and how we are doing interpretations and how we are remembering those thousands of years of settlement by people is something is going to be a priority for me this next year.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Thank you very much, Beverly. We appreciate the update, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
And we're glad we could add one more Zoom meeting to your day.
Yeah. Yeah, the meeting with Contra Costa County went a little longer than we thought. You know, they kept adding things to the agenda. So
that seems to be the theme of today. All the meetings that I've observed have run overtime, and it looks like this one is going to as well. So we will continue the trend, but we'll try to work through as quickly as we can. We have one more item on our agenda, and that is the PAC goals and agenda items. It's a carryover from last month that Eric and I took away and worked on, and we're bringing it back for a recommendation from the group to the board of our 2021 goals and agenda items. It was in your packet, so hopefully you all had a chance to take a look at it. We got feedback from the executive committee, and primarily in doing that, we added items related to JEDI issues, both internal and external items. And we also, at Annie's suggestion, changed the name from goals to goals and agenda items, since some of these things are not goals, but simply things that we want to accomplish during the year. And so with that, Eric, do you have things to add to that before we open for discussion?
No, I mean, I think in terms of looking at the document, and Sharon, thank you for putting it on the screen. And if you want to go to the 2021 goals and agenda items, I think it will demonstrate that the ones that were unmet from last year or this year, I guess, are in yellow, new ones that occurred either through the conversation with the general manager or our conversation last meeting are in purple for 2022. And we did try to put a little bit of an explanation for the goals that were unmet for each one per the group's suggestion. So I don't know, I mean, the new items are wildfire protection and climate change, economic and social impacts of park improvement projects, as Rick just pointed out, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then there's also an external programming and community input process for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then our planning department suggested Clayton Ranch should be available next year. And the general manager recommended an update on the HCP for East Contra Costa County. So I think that's all I would add.
One thing I might add, Eric, is that there was a suggestion that meeting and getting acquainted with the new general manager when that time comes should be added. In consultation with Bob Doyle, we decided not to add it into here because the hiring of the general manager is exclusively the domain of the board, and the timing of that, although there is a time schedule, it still is open, and so we did not include it in here, but we have a commitment from the district that we definitely will be able to meet and interact with the new general manager when that time is appropriate. So with that, I guess I will open the floor to questions. And I think, Elisa, you have a question.
I do. One of the items that was met in the 2020 was the naming of the Concord Hills, quotes around that regional park. Is that something that we should leave or reintroduce to 2021 since there's an issue that Beverly brought to our attention, that it's not quite complete yet and it might be coming back? Will it be coming back around? Well, is it something that's going to revisit the PAC?
That's a good question. Eric, what is your thought on that?
Yeah, it probably will. Actually, Beverly may have more of the specific answer to that than I do, but it probably will, Alyssa. And we can put it back on as at a minimum as a agenda item to have continued discussion if that's the will of the group.
Irene?
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to, this is Irene Dieter. I want us not to forget about adding the part about technology. We had talked about upgrading the use of the agendas. You can just click on agenda items and it will take you right to the subject matter. And I think Rochelle actually brought it up a few months ago too. I forget what was the name of the software program, Rochelle, but anyway, I know that right now we're in COVID and everything's a little crazy and we're on Zoom and everything, but I don't want that to get lost in the shuffle in the coming years.
Yeah, and it's my understanding that we are moving toward that, especially with the board agendas first and then the PAC. And I don't know if Deborah is still on and has any more to add to that, but I believe that we are in that process, Irene, to make it easier for you to find, the specific document or specific staff memo for each agenda item.
Okay, Rochelle, what was the name of that program you had suggested?
Yeah, the one we were using was Granicus.
Oh, that's right.
But I understand that there are some newer and better ones. It's a competitive field and there are a number of options that I understand are worth looking at, and we may be going away from Granicus before too long. But it's wonderful to have a really good search ability that narrows your search to things that are in board packets or in pack packets. It lets you find what you're looking for much more effectively than what we have on the district site now.
Deborah Ocker, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, we are implementing a program called PrimeGov, and behind the scenes, the staff has been working on implementation, and we do plan to roll that out to the public view in the new year. So you'll see something new, Irene. I know we talked about it last year.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So I guess, Irene, I'd be inclined not to add it to our goals, since it is something the district is working on already and will be implemented for us as it's available, if that's okay with you.
I will leave that up to staff. I just don't want it, you know, if you add it, you can always say it's been completed. So I will leave that up to staff.
Okay. Adela.
Just a quick confirmation under Roman numeral 2, number 1, the Trails Working Group update. That's the Trail Users Working Group that was just recently put together, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we should probably add the word users in there.
Thank you.
Yep. Michael?
No, I was going to say, we'll talk about how you want us to report out, for example, on the most recent Trail Users Group meeting. We owe Adele an answer, but real short, it seems to be in most part a more genteel version of the first meeting, which I missed, and I can provide more details offline.
Yeah. I was actually planning in my report to bring that up and ask you and Adela to weigh in on it as appropriate. So we will do that. Igor.
Hi. Well, thank you.
Igor barking?
This, not me. I'm not barking. I couldn't see it in here, and maybe it's because I had my eyes dilated and I can't focus right now. But I would like to make sure that we include a reference towards exploring improving the inclusion of Native American perspectives and participation, and certainly honoring the land heritage that we have from them. You know, it's not like they were here and are gone, they're still here. And so I think it would be a good goal to find ways to get more engagement.
I guess I would think that maybe that's included in the external programming community input area, but I'm open to other suggestions in that regard.
I guess I would like to have something explicitly calling that aspect out, rather than just hoping that it gets included.
Annie?
I just second the motion. I don't know if it was a motion, but it'd be great to, it's a really important part of diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially when we're talking about land. So I just, if we can include mention of Indigenous peoples, I think that would go a long way to support that.
Beverly.
Oh, well, you know, I think one thing that would be a reasonable thing for the advisory committee to ask for is perhaps a report from interpretive staff on what kind of programs that are talking about our Indian heritage in each of the visitor centers, because it's different from one center to another. And sometimes just asking for some of that information can have a very positive effect.
That's good suggestion. Yes. Any other comments on that?
Yeah, it's Adela. I think that's great. And I just wanted to mention that I don't really know a lot about this, but I do know that there are different views and different, you know, clans and tribes and so on of the Native Americans. And so I'm sure the interpretive staff are somewhat aware of it. There are some things that are, you know, where there's little spats going on. And so there's differences in opinions on interpretation of various things. And so just we should rely on interpretive staff for that.
Okay. I think what I'm hearing is that we need to include the Concord Hills naming issue as a goal for this year, as well as being explicit about exploring Native American participation in the parks and including a report from interpretive staff to help us in our understanding. Does that sound like what I'm getting? Is that, I see a thumbs up from Annie.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to approach it. I was primarily sort of motivated to do that, just listening to the public comment before our meeting started. And
Okay.
I think that probably within the staff of East Bay Regional Parks, we already have a reservoir of people who are qualified to help us move in that direction.
Okay. Then I think we're.
Beverly's got something, I think.
Oh, Beverly, yeah.
Could I ask just very quickly, who came, what public comment you did have? Did it have to do with Concord Hills name?
No, it was not that. It was Francis Mendoza talking about issues within the district in terms of promotion.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But he opened up with talking about this being Ohlone land in the first place.
Yes. Yeah. So I believe that what we need is a motion to approve the agenda and goals for 2021 with the two items that I mentioned, Concord Hills and exploring Native American participation, added to that to then submit that to the executive committee and the board.
I so move, Mr. Chair.
Carlin, I'm sorry, a second from
Carlin.
Linda? Okay. The motion was Carlin and the second was?
I think Linda made the motion and I seconded it.
Right.
Oh, okay.
That's correct.
All right. Sorry about that. Madam Secretary, would any further discussion? Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Yes, thank you, Chair Rickard. Vice Chair Obringer,
Yes.
Member Best,
Yes.
Member Brubaker,
Report.
Member Burke,
Yes.
Member Carey,
Yes.
Member DeChambeau, Member DeChambeau,
Sorry, yes.
Member Dieter,
Yes.
Member Gregory,
Yes.
Member Ho,
Yes.
Member Lacy,
Yes.
Member Nason,
Yes.
Member Robinson,
Yes.
Member San Juan,
Yes.
Member Skardoff,
Yes.
Member Satsui,
Yes.
Member Williams,
Yes.
and Chair Rickard.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Okay, we are running late, but if we can move through the rest of this, I think, fairly quickly. Are there PAC member comments? Or is everybody ready to go to dinner?
I just have to go to another meeting.
Or another meeting, whatever you have. Okay, well, let me go ahead with my report, and if you come up with comments you want to make later on, let me know. I just have two things that I want to discuss from the chair. As you saw in my email, there are packages coming out from the district to all of us that cannot be shipped. And so I solicited some volunteers for folks who will serve as distribution points. Hopefully we'll have the items available after Thanksgiving, and we will at that point ask all of you to let us know where you want to pick them up. And so we'll get them to those distribution points for you to pick up. The distribution points are Rochelle in Albany, Linda Best in Alamo, Roland's office in Castro Valley, or Peralta Oaks. And so we'll send something out. You can indicate where you want to pick it up, and we'll provide contact information so you can arrange to make the pickup. So look for that in your email in the next week or so. Then I also wanted to go back to the issue that Michael brought up, which is the Trail Users Working Group. We had our second meeting a week or so ago. As you know, Michael, Adela, and I are the three representatives from the PAC to the working group. This last meeting, we got into a little more detail than we had in the first meeting. The meeting was focused primarily on hikers and how they perceive the trails, what would help them to use the trails better, prevent interactions with other users and so forth. And I think we got fairly good information on that score. Future meetings, we're meeting about every 2 months, will involve other users one at a time as we work our way through the group. And then hopefully we can come back to the PAC with recommendations from the working group. Michael or Adela, do you want to add to what I had said?
Briefly, one of the takeaways was from Sean Dugan, and he has an excellent presentation that can be shared with this group on how they look at trails. Yeah, to your point, this is not going to be a policy decision coming out of this group. It's going to be a lot of listening. My biggest takeaway was in the last, I think I got this right, last 10 years, only 13 miles of new trail have been built.
Correct.
And that's a impressive number for a lot of reasons, but I think the stone cold answer is simply the regulatory and permitting process is huge. It dictates why we don't have many more new trails being built. But the other thing was just to remind you that the traffic use with the trail use at Sibley was the catalyst for getting this group put together. So it's ongoing, it's going to grow. We did get Civic Corps representation on there, so some aspect of youth to speak. I'd like to see more internal, if it's possible, youth from internal staff at the Park District weigh in, but so far it's going better.
Adela, did you want to add to that?
I was unable to attend the meeting, and so Rick and Michael had my comments beforehand, and I wouldn't have anything more to. My concern was just that the group know what its purpose was and what work product they were going for. Because the first meeting, of course, that I attended was just kind of a get to know everyone.
Yeah, I think we're still working in that direction, but we'll see what happens. It was pointed out to me at one point that all three of us who are representing the PAC are from west of the hills, and we might want representation from east of the hills. And I'd actually ask Beverly if she had any interest in trying to add to our crew, but something we can discuss as we go forward. And we will come back regularly to the PAC and hopefully at some point have some work product to present to you. Questions or comments? No? Are there any board committee reports? Any old business? New business? If there are no other comments, the Park Advisory Committee meeting on November 23rd, 2020 is now adjourned at 6:16 p.m. Thank you all and have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody. Nice Thanksgiving.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rick.
Happy